Rana, thanks so much for joining us. What is your impression about where things stand now? This seems bloodier than perhaps past demonstrations, but it seems more robust in some respects as well. So what are your thoughts on what's happening on the ground?
Thanks for inviting me, John, and thanks for covering this topic because it's a huge story, historic for many Iranians, especially Iranian women. What we're witnessing now is a moment that the younger generation in Iran, mainly teenagers and in their early 20s, have decided to come out and say no. Because the death of a 22-year-old girl called Mahsa Amini, after she was arrested by the morality police, so she died in custody, has left many people extremely angry. And the difference between this time and previous protests is that generational difference. We're talking about people who are not afraid.
And the generational differences in Iran are very meaningful. And Americans know it only as, didn't they hold some of our people in an embassy once? So there's the revolutionary generation. There's maybe the Green Revolution generation, which was the last time I think maybe these kinds of protests exploded on the streets. And now there's this generation, maybe 14 years later. Is this sustainable?
That's a very good question. And a lot of people who are protesting on the street think it's unsustainable. So you're absolutely right. Before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran was a liberal country. Socially, it was liberal. Women had equal rights. They could wear whatever they wanted. And then the revolution happened. For many people, it was a democratic revolution, but it was hijacked by the Muslim radicals. A few months later, they introduced compulsory hijab or headscarf. In fact, the first anti-hijab protest was only 25 days after the revolution. Women went out on the street and said, no, we're not doing it. It's very similar to Handmaid's Tale if you've seen it.
Right.
So going from a liberal society where women had equal rights to a society in which you're forced to wear a headscarf. And the resistance continued. 5 years after the revolution, it became criminal not to wear a headscarf.
Okay.
So women without headscarf were not allowed to go inside government buildings. Shop owners were not allowed to give them any service. And then there were police officers stationed in different parts of the city who were arresting women for not observing the headscarf. So when you look at it, the Islamic Revolution took many of the women's rights, more than men, way more than men. So they were the biggest losers of the revolution. And the resistance has continued. 5 years ago, we had a woman who went out on a street in central Tehran called Revolution Street. She stood on top of an electricity box. She held a stick with her headscarf on top of it.
Wow.
People just watched and they thought, oh, she must be crazy.
Right.
And she was immediately arrested and sentenced to prison. Then few more people did it. And they were also arrested. And now 5 years down the line, we're now in 2022, we are seeing people who are out on the street, even in religious parts of Iran, including the city of Mashhad, for example.
Oh, really? That's different. Right.
That is very different.
Yeah.
And there was a footage of a woman standing on top of a car, waving her headscarf. And she's surrounded by men who are cheering her.
Wow. Okay.
We have footage of women who had set up a bonfire and they're dancing around and they are burning their headscarves.
Wow. I mean, people have to understand as well that, you know, you might look at it and say, like, it's the headscarf. But it's symbolic of exactly what you're talking about, which is a society that is being smothered. In America, we've been trained to demonize the Iranian people. But it's the theocracy. It's this conservative regime that is smothering the true heart, the true spirit, I think, of the Iranian people. But it is a divided society. And so I wonder I guess the question is this: what we've seen through the Arab Spring and what we've seen in Iran is that a democratic instinct that wants to breathe free has been no match for how organized the right and the autocracies and the theocracies of that part of the world. So it's the chaos. If it's to succeed, what are you replacing this theocracy with?
I don't think it's been thought about.
Okay.
So at the moment, it's a leaderless movement led by the women's movement, and it has woken up the student movement. So we're now seeing protests and strikes and resignations at universities.
Okay.
And then we are hearing voices from the workers' movement about joining these strikes. So we're now witnessing the birth of a mega movement. But does it have an organization? Not yet.
Okay.
Does it have a leader? Not yet. But the people who are now protesting on the streets, there are no religious slogans.
Okay.
And no slogans in support of the former monarchy. And they
yes, I wouldn't think so.
No. And they don't seem that they are putting too much hope on the West.
I don't understand why, Rana. We're good allies. We're always there for you. Sure. Have we sanctioned you for 70 years and made it so that cancer patients can't get radiation treatments? Of course. But who doesn't make mistakes? that you bring up a great question. You know, we always like to say, we support the great people of Iran and the democratic movements. What would support look like from the West? Would it be ending sanctions? Would it be strengthening sanctions so that they would only hit the corrupt theocrats and not the people on the street? How can you support this movement?
That's a very good question. And I've been asking that question from many of my guests on my show.
Okay.
So sanctions is a very tricky subject to talk about. It's a double-edged sword. Some people say that if there are no sanctions, then the Iranian government will get that money, which is not going to be spent inside the country.
Right.
The politicians will pocket it, or they spend it on their proxy groups in the region to cause more havoc there. On the other hand,
that would be for those, it's sort of Hezbollah and other
Exactly.
proxy groups that Iran is sort of aligned with to maintain power. It's part of the Shia-Sunni split as opposed to the Democrat-theocracy split.
Exactly. The other people, others say that these sanctions are mainly hurting ordinary people. As you mentioned, their difficulty to find medicine. It's not the rich who are usually close to the government who are
Right.
feeling the pain of the sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no right or wrong answers to this.
I'm afraid, Rana, we're going to have a right answer. We've invited you on the podcast. You are our expert. So I'm afraid you're going to have to give us an objective answer, concrete. You're going to have to stand by it.
But I tell you, there are things the West can do. For instance,
Right.
There are some clever moves that the Treasury announced last week, that they removed a clause in the sanctions which potentially would allow Elon Musk to send Starlink internet, the satellite internet, to Iran. Because now the authorities have shut down the internet in large parts of the country. But the youth have also so many years of banning the internet means a lot of people know how to go around it. Even my parents who are in their 70s, as soon as WhatsApp was shut down, within a day, I received a call on WhatsApp from my dad and said, "Oh, you're connected. So I've got a VPN now."
Rana, could your parents, can they be my Genius Bar? Because I would like for them to. I've got a lot of tech issues that I would like to go on.
It's usually young cousins who go and install these for the older
right.
members of the family.
You know, revolution is great until nobody's there to pick up your trash. Mm-hmm. I feel like we failed the Arab Spring in the West. I truly feel we did that. Nobody wants to live in chaos. And we did not provide the kind of logistical support that you would need to provide groups that need to become organized and foundational. How do we begin that work?
To be honest, I think that's something that the Iranians inside the country will have to do themselves.
Right.
Any meddling in what's happening inside the country will potentially jeopardize it.
Oh, okay. So that's it's actually the instinct to be helpful actually then demonizes the movement in some respects.
Especially at this point that the government has a lot of power, especially military power. As soon as they feel that these protests are being supported by outside forces, they will use that as an excuse to use more violence against it and to crack it down.
Right. But they'll do that no matter what. I mean, that's the thing that you sort of learn in 2008. But as
you mentioned the coup of 1953, Iranians don't have a good memory of...
Are we going to go over that again? Ron, how many times do I have to tell you? I'm sorry. You don't understand. The oil was so delicious. And British Petroleum, they said everything would be fine. Damn. What about having someone who had some credibility within the government? Are there leaders not from that generation, but maybe of an older generation who can help then from within the country?
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like this generation that is protesting right now has moved on from the reformists.
Okay.
So the difference between now and 2009, which we call Green Movement because it never became a revolution and it never was a revolution, was they were looking for change within the system because they still hoped that they could change the system. Okay. So the main slogan in 2009 was, "Give my vote back to me."
Right.
They still believed that the establishment might give them their vote. And to remind your audience, there were some presidential elections in 2009, and many believed that it was fraudulent. And that's why hundreds of thousands, if not millions, went on the street asking for the government to cancel the result of that election. But you see, they still wanted to hold on to the establishment.
Right.
13 years down the line, we have teenagers who are shouting on the streets, "Death to the dictator, death to Khamenei, I don't want the Islamic Republic." And the reason is that they don't believe that the Islamic Republic will give them what they are looking for. And what they're looking for is probably just a normal life, prosperity, just this desperation and the ups and downs of sanctions. Is there going to be a nuclear deal? Is life going to get better? And no, it doesn't. So it's just all the crises on top of each other has put them in a position that they feel that this cannot be achieved under the Islamic Republic.
What seems so interesting here is the investment in the young people in not just self-determination, but in a normalcy. This sounds more like, I want a stable future. Mm-hmm. And I'm tired of living in a place this bleak. Totally. Is that more the beyond that? Is that it?
That is it. That is it.
And is that then, how much of this then do they relate to sanctions and the nuclear deal? And what, in their mind, what is the cause of that lack of normalcy?
The Islamic Republic.
Okay, so they don't blame the West. They really do blame.
Yes, a couple of years ago, the first time that I found that the slogan fascinating was in a protest in which people started shouting, "Dushman ma haminjast, durugh migan Amrikast." Our enemy is here. They lie to us when they say it's America.
Wow. You know what? Could they teach that to other countries? Because we could use, if they could, you know what? Let me get a VPN. Let me start spreading that bad boy around the world. That'd be very helpful. Now Khamenei is obviously
83.
Yeah. I mean, he's infirm. Who is his, I guess Soleimani was the general that was killed, that kind of led the Revolutionary Guard and was a real, mythic figure within Iran. They're also aging out. And so who is the next generation of leaders that's going to sustain this? And is there anyone within the theocracy that sees that we are going to have to adapt to this new reality? Or will it be purely another, I'm going to double down on crackdown and theocracy?
So the question of succession is $1 million question, because it's not like North Korea, there isn't a clear successor. But John, with all the crises that Iran has at the moment, the death of Khamenei can be a turning point. It's very difficult to imagine anybody can replace him who would hold such a tight grip of power, who would be able to mobilize the Revolutionary Guards, the religious clerics, the army, and all the older politicians in the country, because Moshtaba is not that old. So that is going to be a very interesting chapter of the Islamic Revolution, and whether the next successor will understand the demand for change and realize that, similar to Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, who would see that, okay, we really need to change, otherwise this situation is unsustainable. And whether that will happen peacefully, that will probably be the best case scenario.
Is that a frustration in Iran ever, that, you know, you look, I don't think you can look at the Saudi government and the Iranian government and suggest that one is open and free and democratic and the other is a terrible repressive theocracy. And yet we're starting golf tournaments with the Saudis and there's no real moral compass that's leading that. And is that a frustration to the Iranian people that they're demonized, their regime is demonized, but looking around the region, they don't appear to be a completely different entity than others that we're absolutely friendly with?
Of course, there's that frustration, but again, they blame the Iranian leadership.
Right.
They don't blame the Americans for being close to Saudi Arabia.
Do they view Saudi Arabia as the kind of foe that we believe them to be for Iran?
There is definitely rivalry.
Right. And Iraq as well?
Less so, especially after Saddam fell and there was a power vacuum, and Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, quickly tried to fill that vacuum. So right now they are very close with parts of the Iranian political establishment. But it's very important to differentiate between the supporters of the government and how they see it, and the protesters who have decided to...
Everybody talks about the American red-blue divide. There's sort of a rural and an urban and a liberal and more conservative. Iran is very similar, that the power of the theocracy is really in the rural areas, in the more religious cities, as you said. The more urban areas are probably more used to a sophisticated, maybe a little bit more of a liberal outlook. Would you say that the women, the brave women that have come out on the street and put themselves in such terrible danger are the tip of the spear of a larger majority feeling in the country? Or do they stand kind of on an island?
They're not on an island. I was speaking with a woman political analyst in Iran, and I asked her about the scale of these protests. And I said, would you say they're out in millions? She said, no. So there are pockets of protests, but it's geographically huge. So over 85 cities have seen protests in the last...
Even the more conservative cities,
the more conservative cities, the city of Qom and Mashhad, some of them are very important in the world of Islam. So they have seen protests.
Qom is the sort of the religious heart, yes?
Yes, exactly. So it's large in terms of the numbers of cities, but small in terms of the number of people who are out actively protesting. But one thing that this woman told me was that there's huge sympathy amongst people. Right. And what's fascinating this time, John, unlike 2009, is that the death of a 22-year-old woman for not wearing a proper headscarf, she wasn't naked, remember? So she still was wearing Islamic headscarf, but for some reason, the officers decided that it wasn't Islamic enough. That has really disturbed many followers of the government as well.
Oh, really? Okay. So even some conservatives are feeling like this morality police move is hair coming out of a hijab is not pretense for imprisoning and unfortunately killing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I was listening to some conversations on Twitter Space where some people from Iran were there, and many of them are religious people, religious parents, and they were saying that, even Prophet Muhammad would never have treated non-Muslim women the way we are treating our Muslim sisters.
Wow.
That's a moment that when with the core supporters of the government are questioning these policies and tactics.
If it's coming from the right, so to speak, if they're being primary and they're the ones, that's where the power would really get hollowed out from. Martyrdom always has a very sort of vaunted place in all revolutionary movements.
It's interesting that on Twitter, when you read those who are out on the streets, they say, yes, over 70 people have been killed so far, but we don't have time for that. We'll come back later to mourn their death.
Okay.
So people don't have time to just sit down and cry. They say, no, there's a bigger goal and we're working towards that. And when we reach where we want to reach, we'll come back and mourn that.
Then Rana, what would they want to reach then? If
regime change.
Oh boy. So they're trying to spur a true from the streets overturning of this government, and they won't stop until they're satisfied.
Yes. And the Islamic Republic has so many difficulties containing these protests, and one of which is that we've seen videos of security officers being shouted at by their commanders to go forward and to beat up people. So clearly, they don't want to do it.
These movements only succeed if you turn the police, or if you turn the military. Has there been any sign that there is a change within those institutions, not just of sympathy, but of we are going to join our brothers and sisters. We are going to stand with them, because wouldn't that really be the change?
That will be a huge change. So far, the only signs that we've seen are those videos that are filmed secretly by people that show that there's these conversations and the commanders are telling them, we are doing the right thing. I want you not to be afraid.
Right.
But we know that, because of the economic deadlock, many of those officers are also suffering.
Right.
So they are not well off. They must be unhappy with the situation, and I'm sure many of them would find it difficult to beat up these women. And don't forget, these women some of them are holding their arms open, they're walking towards these forces, and then they get beaten up.
Rana, what's your relationship now with the country and with the government? Obviously, you said your parents are there, and that's such a difficult situation for anybody who's in a diaspora and living away from the country they love. And what is your relationship now?
So I lived in Iran for 25 years, went to university there, and then I got a job offer from the BBC, and I left Iran in 2008, and I haven't been able to go back because the BBC is not allowed to work in Iran. We don't have an office. And in fact, many of our family members have been persecuted, harassed over the years. My parents' passports were confiscated. They weren't allowed to come out and visit me. And they were told that in order to get your passport back, you should ask your daughter to stop working for the BBC. And I said, that's not going to happen. And eventually they gave up. So I haven't been back, but I still have many relatives there. My parents, my brother, aunts, uncles, they're all there.
And are you able to be in contact with them? And for those owners, BBC, I think, was only allowed in the country in 2009. There was sort of this weird part of what happened in 2009 is they opened the country up for about a month before the elections to demonstrate to the world the grand nature of this democracy. And then obviously it all flipped on its head and everybody got kicked out. But are you able to be in contact with all of your family, and are they feeling this moment, and are they feeling optimistic?
It's a great question. So up until before these protests, I could FaceTime my parents every day, and I did. But now that many of these social media platforms are blocked, I have to actually phone them directly on the line. on which they don't feel very comfortable to talk about politics because they
I'm
feel
sure.
that it's easier to be bugged. But I remember that 2 days after Mahsa's death, there were calls for national strikes and protests, and I was on the phone with my mother, who asked me whether I knew where people were gathering in Tehran, the capital where they live. And I said, "Why do you want to know?" She said, "Because I want to go."
Oh, dear Lord.
And I said, "Mom, you have bad knees and you have a vertigo. Last thing you need is to be tear gassed." And she said something that has stayed with me. She said, "You know what? If they want to kill someone, I want them to kill us because we've lived our lives. I don't want them to live the youth. They have all their lives ahead of them."
Rana, that's heartbreaking. Truly.
And there is this sense of responsibility amongst them because my generation kept blaming them. Look what you did to our lives. So they feel there's this beautiful video of an elderly woman, probably older than my mom, who's 71.
Yeah.
She's got white hair. You can only see her from the back of her head. She can hardly walk. And in the end of the street, you can see smoke and fire and protests. And she's hardly walking with her headscarf in her hand, chanting, "Death to dictator, death to the dictator." So we can now see all generations out there saying, we don't want this life.
It's a remarkable moment. Going up against that kind of institutional governmental firepower is such a dangerous, and is this a seminal moment, or does the crackdown come and people have to retreat to their basements for the next chance?
I think it's the beginning of a very important chapter. I don't think we should be overly optimistic about the outcome at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of networks are being formed.
Right.
But I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves. We're seeing the birth of a movement that is slowly shaping, is slowly finding its slogans, its potential leaders, it's building its networks. And as I said, they're teenagers. Many of them are gamers. I don't know what gamers are, but I've heard that that's where they're communicating with each other.
Now you're talking my language. Now we got some. I'm probably playing COD with these guys. I'm probably playing COD with revolutionaries in Iran as we speak. This is unbelievable.
And one more thing before we move on.
Yeah, sure.
Something that has happened in the psyche of the protesters means we're not going back to what it was before. And that is when a teenage girl jumps on top of a police car, takes off her headscarf and says, "I don't want the Islamic Republic." With no fear in her eyes, she's looking at the forces there. Something happens. It gives her confidence. She feels she can do this. Something that didn't occur to previous generations. They never thought that they could defend themselves. They never thought that they could stand up for their rights. So that's why I think it's very difficult after this to have guidance police beating up. Maybe at this stage, to contain the protest, the government will have to do that. But it's going to be very risky to try to suppress the Iranian youth from this moment on.
And the government, as much as repressive as they can be, every country needs its youth. Every country needs its young people. If you hollow out that infrastructure, even they can see that the corruption is going to collapse. And that's why we see the speed at which some of these regimes collapse. They really do. When it happens, boy, it happens in a cataclysm. It comes at it. Have you been able to be in contact with those on the street? Is there any opportunity for you to get kind of eyewitness accounts and be able to share?
We do. We receive a lot of messages, obviously with difficulty, of people who go to the protests and then they come back and they message us and they'll tell us what's happening in their neighborhood. But Also, again, on some live conversations on Twitter, I heard some of these young girls and boys are out on the street. And it was a fascinating conversation with older activists, both inside the country. And one of them asked these protesters, what can we do to support you? And they said, teach us how to fight and not get killed.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, wow, this is serious.
Yeah, they've decided they've crossed the Rubicon to some extent, and it's a change.
Yes.
You know, from the outside, the news can sometimes distort the how much the people are feeling certain movements, you know, and you can see things, but someone, you know, we do that all the time here. You know, we've got these, you know, in Seattle, they would say it's a chaos. It's Portland. It's Antifa fighting the Proud Boys, and people that live in Portland are like, I'm having a latte, and there's really nothing going on.
That's true about Iran too, John.
Okay, all right. So that I'm curious about whether or not people feel it in that moment.
There are pockets. So in Tehran, for instance, we have Narmak neighborhood or Tehran Pars neighborhood or Tajrish, small pockets of protesters coming out every night, chanting and burning headscarves, and then they go home. And the same is true about other cities. So we're not looking at hundreds of thousands or millions of people marching down the streets. But we know that many of those people feel the same. But at this point, they're not ready to come out on the streets. Whether we reach that point or when we reach that point, that we have no idea.
But Rana, that in some ways, that's a more sustainable model. That by being strategic about it and by not deciding that, you know, there was a certain moment in the Arab Spring where certain countries just decided, this is it. We're shutting the country down until we get what we want. And we saw that those movements didn't necessarily have the kind of staying power and longevity that they may have wanted. Maybe discretion is the better part of valor here, to take your time, to have these protests that pop up and go back. You know, it's young people, they're pop-up stores, you know, they're popping out, they do it, they go back, but all the while creating, as you were saying, that infrastructure, those connections, that network. How have the morality police responded to the outcry in Mahsa's death? And have they disappeared from view for the moment?
Apparently so. So I personally have received so many messages on social media, people saying that, there used to be morality police in that part of the city and they have disappeared. So, and today there was a striking photo that many Iranians found emotional of two women in a cafe in downtown Tehran having tea, wearing no headscarf, so they were just in a t-shirt and trousers.
In public?
In public.
And were they being harassed?
No, they were just sitting there like any normal country. They were just sitting there and having their tea, and they were brave enough to tweet that photo saying that we just came back, for your information, we just had coffee in Javadiya area of Tehran, with their own name.
Wow, okay. And
that's why I think we can't go back, because now there is a crack in that image of an unbreakable dictator. You think, no, we can do this. And there's another footage that I want to tell you about.
Please.
I put it on my Twitter. There's so many striking footages that we've received. There's a young woman standing on a podium, and there are morality police women covered in black veil, everything black. You can just, so they're officers, they're morality police officers. And this young woman in some trousers and a loose shirt, but no headscarf, is standing there. And she's looking at them, and they're trying to arrest her. And she said, no, you're not touching me, and I'm not going with you. You cannot do anything to me. They try to pull her down. She jumps back up there and says, no, I told you, you're not allowed to touch me. Wow.
I mean, the bravery is incredible. It really is. I mean, it's stunning. Mm. And I know that a lot of really brave people have been killed, and probably a lot more than we know about.
Yes, and probably a lot more will be killed.
Rana, I can't thank you enough for spending time. Is there any final thought we like to consider ourselves the center of the universe. And we always end with like, what can we do? Because God forbid something happen in the world that we're not central in. But is there anything that the Iranian people would take heart to? Anything that would give them some feeling of uplift other than letting Iran win the upcoming World Cup? If there's anything beyond that.
I think at this point, more coverage and the support that the Iranians are receiving from politicians, famous people, sometimes it's just a hashtag, means a lot to them.
Really?
And
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It means a lot to them because they just want to know that the world is also paying attention and the world is seeing them. And more importantly, they need the internet. They need to be connected because. So
this Elon Musk Starlink is a big deal. If that can go through and get them those links,
yes,
that could be a really big deal.
Yes, but my understanding is that he needs infrastructure that doesn't exist in Iran. So I don't know the technical aspect of it, but I've heard that it's going to be complicated.
I apologize for the reductive and kind of ignorance that we have.
It was lovely.
But you know what I mean.
Yes.
We just don't know in a sophisticated way what happens there, and our view of the world is generally myopic. So I'm saying me, actually.
I hope that it just brings more attention in the States because I've heard that there hasn't been much coverage of it.
In 2009. It was, I think part of that was because journalists had been let in and it was an election. But I think right now it's so hard to even get access to footage, to people, anything. It's really hard.
It is hard. It is hard. But that symbolic videos and photos of women burning down their headscarves and standing on top of cars. I'm surprised that it hasn't captured the imagination of the Americans as much because in the region, there's support from Turkish women, there's support from Syrian women. Even yesterday, there was some support in which women in Syria, the Kurdish parts of Syria, they marched in thousands and they started cutting their hair to show solidarity.
And I think also in this country, because of what is happening to women's rights here, I mean, as Iran's women are demanding more, American women are receiving less. I mean, we're actually moving back towards that. And it's going back the other way. So So I'm surprised as well that it hasn't had that kind of reaction. But
yes, because it could potentially be the Middle East's Me Too movement.
Right.
In the Iranian society, women in general are stronger. And I think it's because you have to survive. My mom always said, I have two older brothers, and my mom always said that I should have been her son because I'm the one who is risk-taking and troublemaking and all that.
Right. Well,
yes.
well, keep making trouble, Rana.